Madison lifted her champagne flute and grinned at the crowded reception hall. "I invited someone special tonight," she announced. "My ex, a single dad who couldn't even afford a real date back then. Watch him walk in looking exactly like the mistake I dodged." The guests laughed, hungry for the show. Then the doors opened. Cameron stepped through in a tailored charcoal suit, a watch that caught every light in the room, and the calm of a man who owned far more than he showed. The laughter died instantly. Madison's smile froze. The Hartwell estate had cost more than most people earned in a year, and Madison had chosen it for exactly that reason. The wedding ceremony itself was still an hour away, set to begin in the garden after sundown, and this was the cocktail reception that came before it, the part where 200 guests mingled under chandeliers and waited to be impressed. She had wanted marble under everyone's feet, and a guest list that would talk about this night for a decade. Every detail had been arranged to send one message before a single vow was spoken. She had arrived. She had won. For 3 weeks she had rehearsed the moment in her mind. She knew where she would stand, how she would hold her glass, the exact tilt of her chin when she said the word X. The plan was not an accident. It was the centerpiece of the evening, more important to her than the cake or the music or even the man she was about to marry. She wanted a story, and stories needed a villain who walked in looking small. That villain had a name, and the name was Cameron. She had dated him years earlier, back when his entire life fit inside a one-bedroom apartment and a used sedan with a cracked taillight. He had worked long shifts, carried responsibilities heavier than any man his age should have, and never once apologized for the weight on his shoulders. Madison had mistaken that weight for failure. She had walked away convinced she was trading up, and she had spent the years since collecting proof that she had been right. Across the room, her maid of honor leaned close, glittering and gleeful. "Tell me you actually invited him," Brittany whispered, eyes wide with the thrill of cruelty dressed as fun. "Tell me he's really coming." "He confirmed 2 days ago," Madison said, smoothing the front of her gown. Polite little reply. He has no idea what he's walking into. Brittany laughed into her champagne. "You are evil. I love it. He's going to stand there in some sad department store jacket while everyone remembers why you left him." She squeezed Madison's arm. "This is the best wedding favor anyone's ever given their guests. A live demonstration of good decisions." Madison let herself smile, but only halfway. She had learned long ago that the best performances looked effortless, and she did not want to seem like a woman who needed the moment too badly. Still, she needed it. She had built so much of her self-image on the idea that leaving Cameron had been wisdom rather than vanity, and tonight was supposed to be the final public confirmation. The man she was actually marrying found her near the windows a few minutes later. Derek was handsome in the predictable way of men who had never struggled with a confident jaw and a habit of checking his reflection in dark glass. He carried himself like someone who assumed every room had been arranged in his honor, and on most nights, he was not entirely wrong. "You look like you're plotting something," Derek said, sliding an arm around her waist. "I've seen that face before, usually right before someone gets fired." "I'm enjoying my wedding," Madison answered lightly. "Is that a crime?" "Depends who's getting hurt." He smiled when he said it the way men smile when they think a thing is a joke. "Brittany mentioned you invited an old boyfriend, the struggling one, the single father." He let the words sit a moment, tasting them. "That's a strange choice, don't you think?" Madison turned to face him fully, her tone smooth as the marble underfoot. "It's closure, Derek. He never understood why I left. Tonight, he sees the answer in person. There's nothing cruel about the truth." Derek studied her, and for a flicker, she thought she saw something cool pass behind his eyes, a small recalculation. "Just don't make us the entertainment," he said. "I don't like being part of someone else's revenge story." Then the cool look vanished, replaced by the easy charm he wore like cologne, and he kissed her temple and drifted off toward a cluster of his business friends. She watched him go and told herself the unease in her stomach was nerves about the ceremony, nothing more. Around her, the hall filled steadily. Guests in expensive clothes drifted between tables, and a string quartet played something soft and forgettable. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of crab and seared scallops, and the light from the chandeliers turned every surface gold. It was exactly the picture she had paid for. Brittany reappeared at her side, refilled glass in hand, and resumed the conversation as if it had never stopped. "So, walk me through it. He comes in, everyone looks, and then, what are you going to introduce him? Make a little toast." "I already started the toast," Madison said, nodding toward the guests who had heard her announcement minutes earlier. "I told them what to watch for, the poor ex, the cautionary tale. Now they're all waiting for the door. And he just walks into that." Brittany shook her head, delighted. "He must be the most clueless man alive." "He always was," Madison said. "Sweet, hardworking, completely without ambition. He used to talk about being content, like it was something to be proud of." She lifted her chin, slipping into the version of the story she liked best. "Content is what people say when they've given up. I wanted more. I built more." What she did not say even to herself was how many nights she had spent in the early years after the breakup, checking whether any of it had been a mistake. She had searched his name once or twice, found nothing impressive, and felt reassured. She had not searched in a long while. She assumed a man like Cameron stayed exactly where she had left him, frozen in the small life she remembered, a fixed point she could return to whenever she needed to feel superior. That assumption was the foundation of the entire night. It had never occurred to her that a person could change without her permission, that the man she had filed away as a failure might have spent those same years building something she could not imagine. She had stopped looking, and in stopping, she had let her image of him harden into something safe and convenient and entirely out of date. The quartet shifted into a new piece. Somewhere near the entrance, the volume of the room changed in a way Madison felt before she understood it. Conversations did not stop so much as thin out, as though a draft had moved through the crowd and cooled it. She turned toward the tall double doors at the far end of the hall, the same doors she had been watching all evening, and her heart did a small, ugly flip of anticipation. This was the moment. She arranged her face into the expression she had practiced, the warm and pitying smile of a woman about to be generous to someone beneath her. She lifted her glass an inch, ready to gesture toward him, ready to invite the room to look. The doors opened. For one full second, nothing about the man who entered matched the picture in her head, and her brain simply refused the information. She kept smiling at the doorway, waiting for the real Cameron to appear behind this stranger, this tall, composed figure in charcoal, who moved like he had walked into 100 rooms grander than this one. Then the stranger's eyes found hers across the marble, and she recognized them, and the smile on her face stopped meaning anything at all. It was him. The face was the same, older and calmer, the jawline sharper than memory had bothered to keep. But everything around the face had changed. The suit was not bought. It was built the kind of tailoring that did not announce a price, because it never had to. On his wrist sat a watch that caught the chandelier light and threw it back in a hard, clean flash, the sort of object men in this very room recognized and quietly envied. He did not hesitate at the threshold. He did not scan the crowd nervously or tug at his collar or search for a friendly face. He simply walked in unhurried, as though the evening had been waiting for him rather than the other way around. And the guests who had been told to expect a cautionary tale found themselves looking at a man who looked like the lesson nobody wanted to learn. Beside him walked a second man, older, gray at the temples, with the unmistakable ease of serious money. Madison did not know him yet, but she would learn his name was Vaughn, and that his presence at Cameron's shoulder said more about Cameron's life than any speech could. The two of them moved together in low conversation, and the casual way Cameron leaned toward the older man, the way the older man listened, told the room these were not employee and boss, but something closer to equals. Brittany's hand found Madison's arm and gripped it. "That's not," she started, then stopped. "Madison, is that him?" Madison could not answer. Her mouth had gone dry, and the glass in her hand felt suddenly heavy and pointless. The toast she had prepared, the warm, pitying introduction, the whole architecture of the evening sat in her throat like a stone. Every face she had primed to look at Cameron and laugh was looking at him now, and not one of them was laughing. Across the hall, Derek had turned from his business friends to study the new arrival. She watched her fiancé's expression shift from idle curiosity to something more focused, the look of a man recognizing a competitor he had not expected to find at his own wedding. Derek's eyes moved from Cameron's watch to the older man at his side, and Madison saw him do the math, saw him understand that the punchline she had promised was not going to land the way she had sold it. Cameron's gaze, meanwhile, had not left her. He crossed perhaps half the distance toward her, his pace unhurried, and the crowd parted for him without being asked. There was nothing aggressive in the way he approached, nothing that hinted at revenge or grievance. If anything, he looked mildly, distantly amused, the expression of a man who had read the room in 3 seconds and understood the joke had been meant for him. Madison, he said when he reached a comfortable distance, his voice even and low and entirely free of bitterness. Congratulations, the room looks beautiful. The simple courtesy of it undid her more than any insult could have. She had armored herself against contempt, against awkwardness, against a defensive sneer. She had no defense prepared for a man who walked into a trap and complimented the decor. Cameron, she managed. You came. You invited me, he said, as though that settled it. It seemed rude to ignore you on your wedding day. Brittany found her voice before Madison could. And you, she gestured vaguely at the suit, the watch, the older man. You look very different. Cameron glanced down at himself, as if noticing the suit for the first time. Things changed, he said simply. He did not elaborate. He did not list achievements, or name companies, or offer the explanation everyone in earshot was suddenly desperate to hear. He let the absence of bragging do the work, and the work it did was devastating, because a man who refuses to explain his success forces everyone else to assume it is enormous. The older man extended a hand toward Madison with a polite, unreadable smile. Vaughn, he said. I work with Cameron. He insisted we stop by before our flight tomorrow. Said an old friend was getting married and it would mean something to be here. He glanced at Cameron with something like fondness. He doesn't make many social stops. You should feel flattered. The word friend hung in the air with quiet weight. Not bitter ex. Not the man you humiliated. Friend. Cameron had handed her a kindness she had not earned and didn't know what to do with, and the gap between his grace and her intentions opened beneath her like a trapdoor. Madison was aware distantly of the silence that had spread across the nearest tables. She was aware that Brittany had stepped back half a pace, that Derek was watching from across the room with his jaw tight, that the guests she had armed with a story were now reassembling that story in real time and casting her, not Cameron, as the fool. The cautionary tale had a new subject, and she was standing in her own white gown at the center of it. I'm glad you could make it, she said, and the words came out smaller than she wanted, thin and uncertain, in a voice that had announced his arrival so confidently minutes before. The contrast was not lost on anyone. It was certainly not lost on her. Cameron inclined his head slightly. I won't keep you. You have a long night ahead. He glanced once around the gilded hall, taking in the marble and the chandeliers and the careful, expensive perfection of it all, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face that she could not read. Neither admiration nor envy, more like a man recognizing a kind of effort he had outgrown. It's a lovely place, he added. You always did want the room to speak for you. The observation was gentle. It was also exact, and it landed in her chest like a key, turning in a lock she had not known was there. He had named the truth of the whole evening without cruelty, and the lack of cruelty made it impossible to deflect. He let the moment settle, then offered a small, courteous nod, and turned with Vaughn toward the side of the hall, where a server was already moving to bring them drinks. He did not storm out. He did not demand an apology. He simply removed himself from the spotlight she had built for him, and in doing so, he left it burning on her instead. Brittany leaned in her earlier glee, entirely gone, replaced by the nervous energy of someone who had bet on the wrong horse. Okay, she whispered. That did not go how you said it would. Madison, that man is… Did you see the watch? Did you see who he came in with? I saw, Madison said quietly. Everyone saw, Brittany said. That's the problem. Madison looked out at her wedding, at the 200 guests she had personally instructed to watch the door and judge what came through it. They had watched. They had judged. and the verdict forming on their faces had nothing to do with Cameron's old apartment, or his cracked taillight, or the small content life she had mocked an hour ago. The verdict was about her, about the woman who had turned her own wedding into a stage for someone else's humiliation and discovered too late that she had cast herself in the role. She set her champagne down on the nearest table because her hand had begun to shake, and she did not want anyone to see it. Across the room, Cameron accepted a glass from the server, said something that made Vaughn laugh, and looked entirely infuriatingly at ease. He had walked into the worst ambush she could design and turned it into nothing. Worse than nothing. He had turned it around without lifting a finger. The ceremony had not even begun. The vows were still ahead. The dancing, the toasts, the long public hours of a night she could not cancel and could not control. And for the first time since she had begun planning this evening, Madison understood that the story being told in this room was no longer hers to write. She had reached for the satisfaction of looking down on someone, and the floor had quietly moved beneath her feet. And now she had to stand in front of everyone she knew and find out how far she had fallen. The first 10 minutes after Cameron's arrival were the hardest Madison had ever lived through in public. She moved through them on instinct, smiling at guests, accepting compliments on her gown, performing the role of a radiant bride, while every nerve in her body strained toward the corner of the hall where her ex stood with a drink and a calm that would not break. Brittany stayed close, but her loyalty had curdled into something more like damage control. "People are still talking about it," she murmured, steering Madison toward a quieter stretch of wall. "Half the room thinks you planned it. Like you brought him here on purpose to show off that you used to date someone like that. Maybe lean into it. Maybe that's the save." Madison almost laughed. The save. As if there were a version of this evening where instructing 200 people to mock a man, then watching that man walk in, looking like the most successful person in the building, could be spun into something flattering. "That's not what happened," she said quietly. "Everyone heard exactly what I said before he came in. They know what I meant." Across the hall, the cluster of Derek's business friends had drifted toward Cameron, and Vaughn drawn the way money always drifts toward money. Madison watched one of them, a heavy-set man in a navy suit, shake Cameron's hand with the enthusiasm of someone who had just recognized a name. She could not hear the words, but she could read the body language, the slight lean forward, the deference, the way the navy-suited man kept nodding as Cameron spoke. Whatever Cameron had built, these men knew about it. That was the detail that frightened her most. She had assumed his success, if it existed at all, would be the quiet local kind, a decent house, and a steady job, the sort of thing she could acknowledge and still feel superior to. But the men around him now were not impressed by decent. They were impressed by rare. And they were treating Cameron like the rarest thing present. She found out the shape of it by accident, drifting close enough to a conversation between two of Derek's colleagues to catch the thread. They were not whispering. They had no reason to. "Built the whole logistics platform from nothing," one was saying. "Sold a majority stake last year. The number was insane. Vaughn's firm came in early, that's why he's glued to him." The other man let out a low whistle. "And he's just standing at a wedding drinking white wine. If I'd done that, I'd have a billboard." Madison turned away before they could see her face. The information rearranged something fundamental inside her. The man she had walked away from for lacking ambition had quietly become the kind of person other ambitious men flew across the country to stay close to. She had spent years telling a story about trading up, and the story had just been exposed as a lie in front of everyone whose opinion she cared about. Derek found her a moment later, and there was no charm in his face now. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he said, his voice low and tight. "Because I just spent 5 minutes listening to my own friends explain that your sad little ex is worth more than everyone at this wedding combined, including me, including my father." "Derek, you told me this was closure." His jaw worked. "You told me he'd walk in looking like a mistake. Instead, he walks in looking like the smartest man here, and now every person I know is going to remember that my bride tried to humiliate a guy who could buy this venue without checking the price." He shook his head slowly. "This was supposed to be my night, too. You turned it into a joke, and the joke's on us." The unfairness of it stung even as she recognized the truth underneath. Derek did not care about the cruelty of what she had planned. He cared that the cruelty had backfired and splashed onto him. His anger was not moral, it was reputational, and somehow that made it worse, because it meant the man she was about to marry was reacting to the exact same vanity that had driven her own scheme. She had recognized something in him tonight that she did not want to look at directly. "Lower your voice," she said. "People are watching." "People have been watching for 20 minutes, Derek shot back. "That's the problem." He straightened his jacket, rebuilding his composure for the benefit of the room, and when he spoke again, it was through a fixed social smile. "Fix it. I don't care how. But fix it before the ceremony, or I promise you this becomes a much longer conversation than you want to have in a white dress." He walked off to rejoin his friends, leaving Madison alone against the wall with a problem she did not know how to solve. Fix it. As if there were a button somewhere that would unspool the last half hour. She looked across the hall at Cameron, who had just said something that made the heavy-set man in navy laugh out loud, and she felt the full weight of her miscalculation press down on her chest. She could keep performing. She could smile through the ceremony dance, the first dance, and hope the night buried the memory under enough champagne. Or she could do the one thing that terrified her more than public embarrassment, which was to walk across the room on her own feet in front of everyone and speak to the man she had tried to destroy. For a long moment, she did neither. She stood frozen between her pride and her instinct for survival, and in that frozen moment, she understood something she had spent years avoiding. The plan to humiliate Cameron had never really been about Cameron. It had been about her, about the gnawing private suspicion that she had chosen wrong all those years ago, that the content little life she had mocked might have held something her gilded one did not. She had built this entire spectacle to silence that suspicion. Instead, she had handed it a microphone. The decision when it came did not feel like courage. It felt like the only road left that did not end in her hiding in a bathroom on her own wedding day. She set her shoulders, smoothed her gown, and crossed the marble toward the corner where Cameron stood. Heads turned as she moved. She could feel the attention gathering behind her, like a wake, the whole room sensing that the second act of the night was about to begin. Cameron saw her coming, and did not tense, did not smirk, did not arrange himself for a confrontation. He simply turned to face her with the same unhurried calm he had worn since the doors opened, and the men around him stepped back to give them space without being asked the way people do when they sense something private approaching. "Can we talk?" Madison said, somewhere with fewer eyes. "Of course," Cameron said. He set his glass down and gestured toward a set of glass doors that opened onto a stone terrace lit softly and mercifully empty. "After you." Outside, the night air was cool and clean after the heat of the hall. The noise of the party dropped to a murmur behind the glass. Madison wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how much of her confidence had been borrowed from the crowd, and how little of it remained now that the audience was gone. "I owe you an apology," she said, and the words came out stiff and unfamiliar because she could not remember the last time she had meant them. "What I did tonight, what I said before you came in, it was cruel. I planned it to be cruel." "I know," Cameron said. There was no accusation in it. "I knew before I accepted the invitation. You don't invite an ex to your wedding to wish you well, Madison. I understood what the night was supposed to be." The simple fact that he had known that he had walked in fully aware he was meant to be the punchline stripped away the last of her defenses. "Then why come?" she asked. "If you knew what I was planning, why would you walk into that?" He considered the dark garden beyond the terrace before he answered. "Because I needed to know if it would still get to me," he said. "For a long time after we ended, what you thought of me had a hold I didn't like. You decided I was a failure, and some part of me carried that around like it was a fact instead of an opinion." He looked at her directly. "I wanted to stand in a room where you were trying your hardest to make me feel small and find out whether it still worked. It doesn't. That's worth more to me than the suit." Madison absorbed that, and it landed harder than any insult could have. He had not come to win. He had come to be free of her, and the freedom was real, and watching it made her own smallness impossible to ignore. "You could have humiliated me," she said. "When you walked in, you had every chance. Everyone was already turning. One sentence and you could have buried me. I thought about it, Cameron admitted, and the honesty of that was somehow a relief. On the drive over, I had a few sentences ready, things that would have landed. His mouth moved toward something that was almost a smile but carried no cruelty. Then I got here and realized I didn't want them anymore. Hurting you wouldn't have proven I'd grown. It would have proven I was still standing in the same place you left me, just with better shoes. The line stayed with her, simple and exact, the kind of thing she would turn over for weeks. She had spent the evening trying to use other people's eyes as weapons, and here was a man who had decided deliberately not to pick the weapon up. The difference between them had never been money. The money was just the part everyone could see. The real difference was that he had outgrown the need to win, and she had built her whole night around it. Derek's furious. She heard herself say the words, tumbling out before she could stop them. He thinks I made him look like a fool. He told me to fix it. Cameron studied her with something that was not quite pity, but lived in the same neighborhood. And is that what you came out here to do? Fix it. Get a quote from me. You can take back inside something that makes the night work for you again. The question hit precisely because it was fair. Part of her had come out here for exactly that, to extract some gracious public reconciliation she could parade in front of Derek and the guests, to convert even her apology into a performance. The fact that Cameron had seen it, named it gently, and left her room to choose differently was the most uncomfortable kindness she had ever received. No, she said, and was a little surprised to find she meant it. I don't think it is. Through the glass doors, she could see the party continuing without her. See Brittany scanning the room for her. See Derek laughing too loudly at something one of his friends had said, performing ease he did not feel. The whole scene looked suddenly small and brittle, a stage set she had spent a fortune to build, and could no longer convince herself was solid. I used to tell people you had no ambition, she said quietly, watching the party rather than him. That you were content, and content was just a polite word for giving up. I said it so many times I believed it. She turned back to him. I was wrong about what you were. I think I was wrong about what I was too. Cameron did not rush to reassure her, and she was grateful for it, because reassurance would have been a lie, and they both knew it. You weren't wrong that I was content, he said. I was. I'm content now too, and the money didn't do that. I figured out what I actually wanted, instead of what would make other people look at me a certain way. He glanced through the glass at the gleaming hall. That's the part that can't be bought, and it's the part nobody can fake in front of a crowd, no matter how nice the room is. Behind the glass, Derek had noticed the empty terrace. Madison watched him spot the two of them through the doors, watched his expression sharpen, watched him start toward the exit, with the determined stride of a man about to reclaim control of a situation that had escaped him. The collision she had been dreading all night was about to arrive, and she had only seconds left before the privacy of the terrace ended. He's coming, she said. Cameron followed her gaze through the glass and gave a small nod, entirely unbothered. Then I'll make this easy, he said. I'm not going to embarrass you in front of him, and I'm not going to give you a tidy little speech to repair your night either. Whatever happens in the next 5 minutes, you handle it as yourself. He picked up nothing, gathered nothing, simply stood ready. You'll be surprised how much lighter that is. The terrace door swung open, and Derek stepped out the cool night air, doing nothing to cool the heat in his face. He looked from Madison to Cameron and back, and the smile he wore was the kind people put on right before they say something they cannot take back. There you are, Derek said, his eyes locked on Cameron. I was starting to think my bride had run off with the guest of honor. He extended a hand, and the gesture was a challenge, dressed as courtesy. Derek, I don't think we've met. I'm the man she's actually marrying. Cameron shook the offered hand without hesitation, his grip easy, his expression unreadable. Cameron, congratulations. You've got a beautiful venue. It was the same line, almost word for word, that he had given Madison when he walked in, and she understood now that it was not flattery. It was a gentle, deliberate refusal to be drawn into the contest Derek so badly wanted to start. Derek's smile tightened at the corners. He had come out expecting a rival to spar with, and he had found a man who would not lift the glove. Beautiful venue, Derek repeated. Cost a fortune. though I hear that's not much of a sentence for a man like you." His tone tried for casual and missed. "My friends can't stop talking about you. Apparently, I should be honored you came to my wedding." "It's Madison's wedding, too," Cameron said evenly. "And I came because she asked. That's all there is to it." He looked at Madison, then not at Derek, handing the moment back to her, declining once more to make himself the center of it. The choice was clear and quiet, and entirely his, and it left Madison standing on the cold terrace between the man she had tried to humiliate and the man she was about to marry, with the whole shape of her future suddenly visible, and not at all what she had imagined an hour before. The three of them stood on the terrace in a silence that belonged to Madison alone. Derek wanted a fight, and Cameron would not give him one, which left the entire weight of the moment resting on the woman in the white gown, exactly where she had spent the whole night trying to make sure it never landed. Derek turned to her, and his patience was visibly thinning. "Well," he said, "you dragged us out here. You wanted to talk. So talk. Tell your old friend goodbye, and let's get back inside before the whole night falls apart any worse than it already has." Madison looked at him, really looked, and saw the evening clearly for the first time. She saw a man who had not asked once whether she was all right, who cared about the wedding only as a stage for his own standing, who was furious, not because she had been cruel, but because her cruelty had cost him face. She saw, in other words, a mirror, and she did not like the reflection. "You keep saying the night fell apart," she said slowly. "But nothing fell apart, Derek. A man walked into a room and was decent. That's all that happened. The only thing that broke tonight was the version of me that thought humiliating someone would make me look good." She heard her own voice steady as she spoke, as though saying the truth out loud was reinforcing it. "And honestly, I think that needed to break." Derek stared at her like she had started speaking a language he did not know. "You're doing this now. Some kind of breakdown at our wedding." He gestured sharply toward the glass doors and the gleaming party beyond. "There are 200 people in there waiting for a ceremony. My father is in there. My business partners are in there. And you want to stand on a balcony and have a moment of conscience with your ex." The contempt in the word conscience told her everything. She had spent years convincing herself that ambition and refinement were the same as character, that a man who wanted big things must be a big person. Standing here, she finally understood the difference. Cameron had built something enormous and stayed gentle. Derek had inherited comfort and stayed small. The size of a life and the size of a person were not the same measurement, and she had been reading the wrong one her entire adult life. "I'm not having a moment of conscience," she said. "I'm having a moment of clarity. There's a difference." She glanced at Cameron, who stood quietly to the side, neither inserting himself nor retreating, simply letting her find her own footing. "An hour ago, I told a room full of people to laugh at a man because he was once poor. I thought that would make me feel powerful. It made me feel like the smallest person in the building. And the worst part is, no one had to do anything to me. He just walked in and existed, and I did the rest to myself." "So this is his fault," Derek said, jabbing a finger toward Cameron. "He shows up dressed like that, flashing that watch, and now you're rethinking your entire—" "He didn't flash anything." Madison cut in, and the firmness in her own voice surprised her. "He shook hands. He complimented the room. He called me a friend in front of people I just told to mock him. He had every reason to destroy me tonight, and he chose not to. You've been out here 90 seconds, and you've already tried to start a fight with a man who won't fight you." She held Derek's gaze. "That tells me more about both of you than anything that happened inside." The accusation hung in the cool air, and Derek's face cycled through several reactions before settling on cold. "Careful," he said quietly. "You're talking yourself into something you can't walk back. We have guests. We have a ceremony scheduled in 40 minutes. Whatever this is, you put it away, you go back in there, and we get married. And tomorrow, you can have whatever crisis you want." He straightened his cuffs. That's not a request. It was the cuffs that did it. The small, vain gesture she had seen Cameron not make the same reflexive grooming that revealed a man more concerned with how he looked than with the woman in front of him. Madison realized she had been about to marry someone who, faced with her standing on the edge of the worst night of her life, had offered her a schedule and a threat. "No," she said. The word came out quietly, but it carried. Derek blinked. No what? No, we're not getting married in 40 minutes. She felt the enormity of it settle over her, terrifying and clarifying at once. Not tonight. Maybe not at all. I built this whole evening to prove I made the right choice years ago, and the proof came back the other way. I can't stand in front of 200 people and promise forever to a man whose first instinct when I was falling apart was to manage me. She drew a breath. I did that to Cameron once. I treated a person like a problem to handle. I'm not doing it again. And I'm not marrying someone who does it to me. Derek's composure finally cracked, but not into hurt, into fury. Do you understand what you're saying? Do you have any idea what this costs? The venue, the guests, my family's name. You'd blow all of it up over a guilty conscience and an old boyfriend in a nice suit. That's the third time you've mentioned the cost and the family name, Madison said. You still haven't asked if I'm okay. You haven't once tonight. She shook her head slowly. And that's the answer, Derek. That's the whole answer. For a moment he looked like he might say something cruel enough to match the night, but Cameron shifted his weight slightly, not threatening, just present a reminder that there was a witness, and Derek thought better of it. He took a step back, then another, his jaw tight. You're going to regret this, he said. By tomorrow morning, you're going to wish you'd just gone through with it. Maybe, Madison said. But I'd have regretted the other thing longer. Derek turned and yanked the glass door open, and the noise of the party rushed out for a second, before the door swung shut behind him, sealing the terrace back into quiet. Through the glass, Madison watched him stride into the crowd, watched him find his father, watched the older man's face change as Derek spoke close to his ear. The news would move through the room like a current. There was no stopping it now. She found that she did not particularly want to stop it. That was brave. Cameron said the first words he had offered in several minutes, and probably the worst timed decision a person can make. You'll have a hard few days. I know. She let out a breath that shook only a little. I have to go in there and tell 200 people there's no wedding. My mother is going to faint. Brittany is going to need oxygen. A sound came out of her that was almost a laugh, fragile and genuine. An hour ago, my biggest fear was that you'd show up looking poor. Now I'm calling off my own wedding on the balcony. For what it's worth. Cameron said, the thing you're afraid of in there, the embarrassment, the looks, the whispering, it's survivable. I know, because you tried to do it to me tonight on purpose, and here I am. He almost smiled. Embarrassment doesn't kill people. It just feels like it for a while. Madison looked at him. This man she had spent years filing under failure, who had turned out to be the only adult on the entire estate. Why are you being kind to me? She asked. I genuinely don't understand it. I tried to ruin you in front of everyone you might do business with. You should be enjoying this. I told you, he said. I came to find out if your opinion still had a grip on me. It doesn't. And once that was gone, there was nothing left to be angry about. He glanced through the glass at the party in its first moments of chaos. Watching you tear down your own night isn't satisfying, Madison. I spent too long being the person other people looked down on to enjoy doing it back. The simple grace of it was almost unbearable. She understood finally and completely that the success that had dazzled her when he walked through the doors was the least impressive thing about him. The suit and the watch and the older investor at his side were just the surface. The real thing, the part she had thrown away years ago and could never get back, was a man who had been treated as small and refused to become small in return. I'm not going to ask you for anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not standing here hoping you'll catch me. I know how that would look, and I know I haven't earned it. She squared herself toward the doors. I just wanted to say it before I go back in. You were right about me. I don't think I even knew who I was when no one was watching. I'm about to find out. That's the only useful thing tonight gave you, Cameron said. Don't waste it. She nodded and gathered the front of her gown in both hands and walked toward the glass doors and the storm waiting behind them. She did not look back to check whether he approved, and that small absence of need felt like the first honest thing she had done all evening. Inside the hall had already shifted. Word had spread far enough that the music had faltered, that clusters of guests were turning toward her, with open curiosity, that Brittany was hurrying across the marble with her face white. Derek stood near the head table with his father, both of them rigid with the particular anger of men whose plans had been disrupted in public. Madison did not go to them. She walked instead to the small raised platform where the toasts were meant to happen, picked up the microphone that had been set out for the evening, and tapped it once. The sound cut through the hall, and the remaining conversations died, and 200 faces turned toward the bride, who had promised them a spectacle, and was about to deliver when nobody had predicted. "I owe you all the truth," she said, and her voice carried clear and steady across the marble. "Earlier tonight, I told you to watch the door. I told you a man was coming who I wanted you to look down on. I called him a single father who couldn't afford a real date. I set him up to be the joke of my wedding." She let the words sit, refusing to soften them. "I was the joke. He walked in, and he was gracious, and he was kind, and he was a better person in 5 minutes than I'd been in 5 years. That's the only thing worth remembering from tonight." A murmur moved through the crowd. She found Cameron near the back, having slipped in quietly behind her, standing beside Vaughn, with an expression she could not fully read, but that held no triumph in it. She turned slightly toward him as she spoke, addressing him as much as the room. "Cameron, I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that wants something back, just sorry." She looked away from him back to the wider crowd. "And there isn't going to be a ceremony tonight. I won't pretend everything is fine and marry someone in 40 minutes because the schedule says so. You all came for a celebration, and I'm sending you home with a story instead. I'm sorry for that too. But it's the most honest thing I've got." She set the microphone down into a silence so complete she could hear the chandeliers humming. Then she stepped off the platform, and the noise rose behind her, shock and gossip and the scramble of a night collapsing, and she walked through all of it, with her chin level and her hands steady. Cameron met her near the doors. He did not offer to fix anything, did not slip her. His number did not turn the moment into a beginning. He simply gave her a small nod, the kind one person gives another when respect has been earned the hard way. "You did the difficult thing," he said, "in front of everyone. That's worth more than any of this." "It doesn't feel like it yet," she admitted. "It won't for a while," he said. "Then one day it will." He gestured toward Vaughn, who was already moving to retrieve their coats. "We have an early flight. I'm glad I came, Madison. Not for the reason you invited me, but I'm glad." And with that, he turned and walked out the way he had come, in unhurried, free, leaving her standing in the wreckage of the evening she had built to humiliate him. Madison watched the doors close behind him and understood the lesson would outlast the embarrassment by years. She had tried to raise herself by pushing someone down, and the only thing that had risen was the truth about who she had become. The man she had labeled a failure had walked away as the richest person in the room, and not because of the watch, because he had nothing left to prove, and she was only now learning what that cost and what it was worth. The hall emptied slowly behind her. She did not hide from any of it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, there was no plan, no audience to manage, no story. She needed someone else to tell on her behalf. There was only a woman in a white dress at the end of a night that had gone nothing like she intended, standing on her own 2 feet, finally quiet enough to hear herself think.